Systems engaged. Frequencies synchronized. Prepare for incoming transmission. Coming to you from somewhere in the multiverse, this is Robots from Tomorrow. This show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and as always your podcatcher of choice. For the full archive featuring over 800 episodes of comics and comics-friendly content like interviews, book discussions, and freeform tomfoolery, please go to robotsfromtomorrow.net. Here is your host, Greg.
Hello and welcome to Robots from Tomorrow. My name is Greg. Thanks for joining me. Today has Aditya Bidikar back on the show to talk about his Image Comics miniseries and mainstream comics writing debut, In Your Skin. He's brought artist and collaborator Sam with him to do what he ended our last conversation hinting at, go on the record about making the book without fear of spoiling anything. Now the issues are out, all the cards are on the table, and appropriately enough for this book, we get to peel back a layer or three about what went into building this body horror, identity fluid tale. I don't get to do as many of these type of exit interviews as I would like, and I really appreciate Aditya for giving me this opportunity. Getting a chance to talk to Sam was great. His insight really does help flesh out the behind-the-scenes picture, fleshing out, pun mostly not intended, as well as the importance of a good coffee shop in the career of a cartoonist. Turns out, it can be super, super important. But one of the things about doing these interviews that I've noticed recently is getting ready for them is kind of like an actor taking on a role. We both have to do research or homework for a performance or event, and then afterwards we both move on. Although there's certainly more of an opportunity for an actor to stay in a role than I've given myself. But even though we move on, I think a little piece of that role does stay in our head. Like in my case, I can feel a sense of, well, not ownership per se, but like some type of, like a continued recognition of that person or persons or thing or whatever that's now on my radar where they weren't before. And the way Robots is structured, it's always been much more about looking for guests on that radar than having them just show up in the inbox. Although that does tend to happen every once in a while. Which means once somebody or something gets into the robot's orbit, it tends to hang out on a particular, elliptical path. It's either in the foreground or the background, but it does tend to stay there. That's one of the reasons I like going back to prior guests and checking in to, see what they've been doing since their last orbit around the robot mothership, I guess. And I've been doing a few of those recently. I did Sierra Barnes, Chris Schweitzer. I've got another one coming up next episode with Paul Gravett that I'm really excited to share. But then after that, I've got at least 3 new to the show folks to talk to because, I want to keep a balance, keeps things fresh. So let me swing back to Aditya here. He's been in the robot's orbit since 2021, so I've been privy to him being pretty frank in public discourse about his struggles trying to maintain a career in comics without burning out. When somebody shares something like that, you want to see them succeed. It's only natural. And I think I said something to the effect of this in the first In Your Skin interview, but it does bear repeating. Yeah, I enjoy the book. I mean, legitimately so. But I enjoy the book as much for Aditya as I do for the book itself. In Your Skin is exactly the type of cathartic experience you want someone in his position to have. It's a win. And getting to have Robots be a place where he can come and do a little extra victory lap is, well, it's not why I do the show, but it's also not why I do the show. Robots is for me, and you the listener, and all the various folks I've been lucky enough to catch on their individual orbits through the multiverse of comics. Well, here's 2 of them now. In Your Skin's artist, Sam, and writer, Aditya Bidikar. A few months ago, writer-letterer Aditya Bidikar came onto the show to talk about the first issue of his mainstream comics writing debut, In Your Skin, from Image Comics. Now that his Bollywood, body horror, identity, and parasociality exploration has reached a conclusion, he's back to talk about the story as a whole, free to spoil as necessary to get to the heart of what he was going for. And he brought backup. Joining us today is Sam, his collaborator who brought In Your Skin to life. While he has worked primarily in film, animation, and VFX, this Mumbai-based artist has done comics work before, most notably with Philip Kennedy Johnson on Boom's Crocodile Black. But In Your Skin doesn't read like a book from early in someone's career. It reads as a work of confidence from all sides. So we can get right into the In Your Skin exit interview with artist Sam and writer Aditya Bidikar. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
It's a nice Monday afternoon here, and I'm about to start my week's work.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about what next after In Your Skin pretty much.
Sam?
Yeah, same here. Mumbai rains are keeping me busy. So the temperatures are a lot cooler. Good. I have taken up some work already. So I'm already in the middle of some of the stuff that I'm working on. Yeah, hopefully we will get to see some of that soon too.
In Your Skin, issue 4, the final issue, is now out in the world. There's no more drawing pages during interviews. There's no more checking proofs. There's no more editorial notes. How does it feel to be on this side of the project?
When I turned 35, I kind of set out some goals for myself for the year and for the next few years. And the biggest among them was I wanted to finish a book that was written by me by the age of 40. I'm a year late on that. Actually, like when this goes out, I will have turned 41.
Mm.
But like it's my first book and I haven't gotten to grips with that yet. It's such a big thing for me. Like I've been writing since I was 13. I wrote my first novel in quotes when I was 15, tried to write like 5 other things over the years, kind of kept failing, quit writing, then came back to writing, and now my first book is out in the world. That's a huge thing. So that's how I'm feeling, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a wild ride. It was very different from my first experience. It was intense in a different way. I think a lot of the intense element of it was self-imposed because I was trying to draw a city which I am familiar with, which I live in. So there was a lot of self-imposed stress and pressure that way. I don't think this comparison, I mean, if people are kind enough to take it as a joke, I feel like the seconds after how a pregnant lady delivers, it's, yeah, I hope people don't take it offensively. Yes, there's no comparison. But yeah, I mean, it's a sense of relief. But at the same time, there's this, there's butterfly in your stomach as to you haven't seen the baby and how, you would want to finally see it come together, So, I mean, in case the baby is together, but sorry, my metaphors are all going...
close enough.
Yeah. Like the book coming together. And the weird bit is that even I haven't read the story in one go. I have the first 3 issues, fortunately. So I haven't read any of them because I wanted the pleasure to kind of... So I've skimmed through the pages, but I've not given it a read. So this is the first time when I get my first copy of the 4th issue, I'll get to sit and read the whole thing together. So I think then I'll be able to understand how it all came through. So yeah, so there's this nervous butterfly in your stomach sort of a thing as well.
Well, as somebody who has seen and read all 4 issues, although, as I said before recording, I too have not sat down and read 1 through 4 in one sitting together, but I have read every issue multiple times. It really comes together well. But we will get into that. Obviously, I have notes and questions, but Aditya, you called this at the end of our last interview. You really wanted to have this opportunity. Is there anything in particular you want to start us off with?
Something that struck me through the release of the book rather than through the making of the book was the difference between a serialized experience and a single read experience. It's quite interesting to me that I wouldn't even call it necessarily a criticism. It was just an observation from a lot of people that they came out of the first couple of issues confused. And it's fascinating to me the way we deal with not knowing everything at the end of a read. Right. So like you read the first issue and you are unclear on a couple of things. You read the second issue and some of those things become clear, but other things become unclear. And it's fascinating to me that I think we are leaving the binging era a little bit, like we are kind of coming back to serialization, even in television. And I thought it would be really fun for people to not know certain things, right? Like you look at a series like Severance, it has a lot of questions. And the dissonance between enjoying that feeling and why is this book doing this to me? That dissonance was very interesting to see for me. Because I enjoy that dissonance. As long as I know that the author knows what they're doing, I enjoy being held in the palm of somebody's hands and like not knowing everything that's going on. And it was very interesting to see who enjoyed that and who didn't.
With comics, because you know it's going to be a limited series. So you know I'm going to get 3 other bites out of this apple. And okay, I got enough in the first one, and then the second one, you're like, okay, now he's only got 2 left. Okay, now it's like only 1 more left. And I don't even know why I'm like hesitating on certain things. I do have something I want to bring up in a little bit, but the mechanism of the body horror, you don't really do any explanation of how Priyanka or Aisha are able to do what it is they do. And I don't think you need to, but I can see how somebody could come into, I guess that's maybe the difference between like something horror tinged versus a science fiction thing. Like, I want to science this out. What's the theory, the mechanism? What's the totem that's allowing this thing? And for horror, nope, you are not going to get that. And it's okay. And I can see if somebody's expecting one and not the other, they could be like, eh.
So it's interesting that you kind of talk about science fiction and horror, because I could give you 8 explanations on what happens exactly there, right? None of them meaningfully change the story. But in science fiction, that would meaningfully change the story. I have an explanation if you really want, but the story doesn't change. So why would I give you that? That was my thinking throughout the process. I could put something there that technically explains what happened there, except if that's not going to change the story, I would rather leave.
Right. You frame the story in such a way that becomes part of the larger story, not the main reason we're reading. There are things visually that set up stuff early on. There are recurring motifs. I'm assuming the mask has something to do with it. It's in there enough to clearly be connected to it, but not need it to be explained, at least me.
Yeah, I have a very explicit philosophical answer for this, which I'm not going to give, because I would rather the reader grapple with that.
So this is going to be the big interview where everything get answered except for that.
See, I mean, I kind of believe in the idea of the death of the author, in the sense of once the book is out in the world, my point of view on this is no longer more valid than somebody else's point of view. But there are certain things that are within the story that are interior to how I made it, that could have more authority than somebody else's read. And those are the things where I would rather not say those things, because I would like the reader to grapple with the idea. And it's not, all I can say is that it's not a plot-based thing, it's a philosophical thing. It's something that the story is about that kind of makes that a reasonable choice for me.
Perfect answer. It's important, but it's not important. So, Sam, I have to ask, do you like drawing anatomy?
I think I do.
Because if you didn't, man, you do a really good job of faking it. I kept going back to the instruction of like, you also need to know anatomy and all of these things in order to break these rules. Here, you do both. You have to be anatomically precise, but you have this almost Tex Avery, Bigfoot cartoony type of stretching of bodies, but in a way that's realistic, which is both funny but also really unsettling. So congratulations for that. How important was sketching people in a coffee shop to where you got to with this book?
Oh, okay. I didn't see that question coming, honestly. I'll answer the first one first. Yes, I enjoy doing anatomy. I happen to be a visiting faculty in one of the institutes, and anatomy is one of the subjects that I teach. So I have to really know some of the bits to do justice to it. Yeah. And funny anecdote to that is like when BD was telling me about the 3rd and 4th issue, I think it was in the middle of the 2nd issue that he was talking about the 4th issue, that in the 4th issue, there'll be a lot of skinless people. And I was just dismissing, yeah, that's the easy bit. I'm not worried about that. I distinctly remember that. I said, yeah, that I should be able to, because we were also discussing timelines and all of us were concerned that we should not miss the timelines, and because they were very intense pages.
Yeah, I think you were talking about schedule, and I think you wouldn't mind me telling you about this, but like I wrote certain pages in issue 3 to be easy to draw, for him to be able to replicate an image and just make edits to it. And this guy decided that, no, I'm going to draw all of it. So that's when I was telling him that, hey, you know, issue 4 is going to have a lot of skinless people. There's going to be a lot of detail, etc., etc. And he's like, actually, that's the easy bit for me. Like, you're telling me like there's going to be easier pages in it. Yeah.
the actual question, drawing people in coffee shop. I guess it's one of the best things that I did, and it has really, really helped me. The way I got into coffee shops was I was a very mediocre kind of an artist, at least in my eyes. I still am. Yes, that's a different thing. But yeah, when you're starting out, you're really vulnerable to the idea of raw skills, and how you will understand and all of that. So I gave myself a challenge that, what I'll do is I'll get every excuse out of my way to sit and draw. And the excuses were, generally you would get distracted by something, or if you're sitting on a desktop and working on something pops up or somebody calls and all of those things happen and you don't really get a chance to work on what you're doing. And there are other things as well, social and other commitments. I used to take my phone, put it on airplane mode and sit in a coffee shop. The idea was that I'll find a place where people don't come and bother me. So I used to find a corner space in a coffee shop. Coffee shops work well because they're top lit. So they light the form in a really good way. And you can find like different angles in which you can find different kind of lights. So they highlight the shadows with very dark cast shadows and stuff. So they really built my understanding of the form in a lot of ways. Like I used to take measures that I don't make people realize that I am drawing them. Because in India, what can happen is that, people might misunderstand you sometimes and they might be uncomfortable with the idea that somebody is just looking at you, and that breaks the rhythm of the drawing. You are not engaged with the subject anymore. There's a different sort of a dynamics that has been created. So the best way is to find a place where nobody can come behind you and see what you're doing. At the same time, I would just skim through my eyeline and I would notice the gesture of the figure and I would just keep drawing. So I would never look at that figure in particular and draw. And I would get nuances which otherwise I wouldn't get. Not everybody holds a spoon. Everybody has their own way of holding the spoon because it's not a very heavy thing and your fingers can take the weight in different ways. So you get really interesting gestures of how the fingers are and you get sensitized to that over a period of time. And you say, okay, I'm going to pick that up. Then people get really comfortable about the seating. So you understand how weight shifts and all of that. And just doing those, it ingrains sets in place your understanding of the things. It questions certain other aspects, but it also helps you establish certain things which you have understood. And then that you can put into practice in other gestures. Like if somebody is putting his weight completely on the left buttock, the glute, then the right buttock is going to react in a certain way. It is also interacting with space, but it is not carrying the weight. And then when somebody gets up, then where will he put his hand? So I would go through these scenarios. Okay, if this guy has to get up, where will he be putting his weight now? Will he be moving it from the left to the right, or will he be? And I would act it out in my head multiple times to understand, oh, what feels more natural? Either way is possible, but you go through these imaginary scenarios in your head and you get sensitized to gestures a lot. So I think I credit a lot of my understanding of figures and how they move to all the years that I spent in a coffee shop sketching. Yeah.
So it sounds like you are seeing stretches of time and you're picking moments and being like, okay, what is this particular moment or that particular moment? In your day job, you've done work as a storyboard artist, right? Okay.
Yeah.
My understanding of that is that you are one of, if not the first person to get a sequence and break it down into images. So you're the one that decides if a man runs down a hall, opens a door, runs through an apartment, jumps out a window, blah, blah, blah. That's like one big sentence. You're the one that says, okay, I need this particular image, this particular image, this particular image. It's also a skill that comic book artists use because they get a script and they need to break down, hopefully not being asked to do all of that in one panel, but you're also the person who has to pick the moments. Has your story career helped you in comics, taking a script and saying like, okay, I'm confident I need this image, and this image in order to convey what's going on here?
Yeah, it does. What also happens is in animation, you have this thing called a key pose. So what a key pose does is that it communicates the essential beat in the most effective way possible. And you kind of have to go through a lot of poses to essentially nail that one key pose. You have to understand, oh, this communicates the beat the best. And the old masters of comic book artists, like the Mobiuses and the Kirbys, they had that intrinsic understanding. So they used to draw the key poses essentially. And what it does is that once you have understood the key pose, I tend to see if I can add nuance enough so that it stops being a very stiff key pose. Like if somebody has to call somebody out, it's a very cliche is, you push the gesture to make it more dynamic and all of that. And then once I started understanding that, then you also try and understand the story beat moments where stiffness or pushing the gesture is the best way and where pulling them back would yield a better result. So there are times when you are in intense action and you want the panels to be a little strained, and then you push your gesture to the point where the nerves are kind of popping out and all of that. But there are times where you have to be a little more subtle. So it's slight bit of a bend to the hand and around the elbow. And it's still the same gesture. And then you see if you can tilt the head slightly on the side and push it a little back. And then you see the kind of attitudes that you begin to get. And these are also things which you try enough in storyboards so as to bring out the acting in it. And I think that also helps in comics.
Something that movies have, which animation doesn't have and comics doesn't have, is actors, right? Your actors are going to express things that you are not necessarily saying out in the text, but they kind of come through the acting. I noticed that a lot of comic book artists, especially in superhero comics, will do the loudest version of the expression and the pose. Like they'll do the most dynamic, quote unquote. Then each character is getting angry in the same way. Each character is getting like sad in the same way. Like they might look different, but the expressions are basically the same. I think I'm spoiled on my first book that I got to work with Som because he will take the expression to the extreme and then kind of pull back. And that pulling back is often like individual to the character. Like the way Priyanka gets angry is not the same way Aisha would get angry. And he manages to convey that. That's like a huge advantage we had on this book. But the other thing about the comics translating to storyboards thing is that we had these very long conversations around issue 1, which kind of fed into how issue 2 was written and then drawn, is that a lot of comics these days are kind of drawn like television in the sense of like there's an establishing shot, then there's blocking, like basic blocking, like you don't break the 180 rule, like you have the camera here, then the camera goes there, etc. It's sort of just about the people talking. So you prevent yourself from doing other things that could be interesting because once you've established who's speaking, and as long as you can convey who the dialogue is coming from, you should feel free to move through the scene in any way you feel like, right? Like the image doesn't need to specifically convey the expression of the character at all times because the scene is kind of being filled out. This is where the juxtaposition that exists in comics kind of comes in because I might not show you the expression of the character in this panel, but you've already seen it in the previous panel. You can still look at that previous panel. So you don't necessarily need to establish at each moment how the character is feeling when they're saying this, which is how I feel like a lot of current comics are drawn. So between issues 1 and 2, I found myself going back to like the 80s and early 90s to see how people would stage dialogue. Let's say in Frank Miller's Daredevil, there's like one tall panel containing enough dialogue that would go through an entire page at this point in time. Current day comic book creators would probably stage that way. And I feel like that's a limitation of how comics are written through the image rather than through the action, right? Like a screenplay is written in the action and then the storyboard artist and the director kind of break it down into images. But in comics, especially with full script, the writer is supposed to kind of provide the basic image. And that's supposed to be a skill, right? Like that is part of the skill of a writer in comics, that you're choosing which moment is being depicted here. And after our conversations, I was trying to go back to how a cartoonist would do things. So I had a lot of conversation with my friend Junie, who writes and draws his own stuff a lot of the time. look at these older artists where the image was primary in telling the story. And you can sort of see the difference in how issue 1 and 2 is written, because the juxtaposition plays a bigger part than a single image. And I don't think that would have happened without a conversation between me and Som, where he was like, I noticed that a lot of comics these days are written like this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. And like that's not how you would necessarily shoot it in a movie. And that's not how it needs to be in a comic. So that conversation of what is the moment that you're trying to depict kind of became very important in how the thing was written and drawn, I think.
Yeah. You have to trust your collaborators to do that. And clearly, you both trust each other. Can you talk about the coloring, collaborating with Francesco Segala?
Basically, we tried a couple of artists here in India, and it wasn't working out that well. Eric kind of recommended that, you should check this guy's work out. And I was a huge fan of Don Rana back then. So we thought, yeah, maybe he could bring in the sensibilities that we were looking for. And that is how we ended up trying Francesco. We gave him the first few pages as a test just to understand. Yeah, I mean, the first page that he painted was absolutely gorgeous. We were sold on that. I remember calling BD in a very gloating sort of way where I was like, I think he's the guy. I think he's the guy. He has a lovely understanding of color as well. Like, it wasn't his color palette, honestly. So we told him that, we're looking at Bollywood where, and India in general has a little bit of loud sense of color. So we have to kind of get that balance. We can't really go all primaries into one and then hurt the eyes where there's no focus. But at the same time, maybe one primary needs to be pushed a little harder than usual. So he understood that and he flew with it. So he was very, very open to trying different stuff and like making one primary shot scream out in that page to bring the page emotionally together. So
yeah, like he also kind of brought in this idea of like the sex scene in issue 1 is kind of rendered entirely in red. And then we ended up using that as a motif through other scenes throughout the book, because we knew that that's going to be such a big visual signifier that we can then deploy that in other places. You know, so it kind of like the color also affected the way we did things.
And a lot of times what also happens is that contextually he wasn't aware of how, say, a pub in Bombay looks like, or a certain specific space. How does the aesthetics of that looks like? So sometimes we actually liked how he treated things differently. It was to our advantage. And sometimes when we thought it's going away a lot from the original aesthetics, then we would just ask him to, kind of bring it to our liking. But it was a very free-flowing sort of a interaction. So, yeah.
It was also an interesting exploration of how different cultures approach different things. Because like even with Eric, like there was this funny moment when we were scripting issue 1, when we were drawing issue 1, in the last scene, like Aisha turns on the switch in her trailer, and apparently in America it's the other way around, so it looks like she's turning it off. Like that was something we faced with Francesco, where the script would say that, oh, this is like a posh place, like as in this is like a rich person's house, and that looks a certain way in India and that looks a certain way in Italy. So like that was an interesting thing to navigate, what a certain social position would mean in a different culture and how it would show itself. Like honestly, it was a good experience.
Yeah, the melding of cultures allows you to get the best of both. Touching on the use of color coding, but you're giving almost like a little grace note of something that happened years before. If we don't know where that is in the overall history, because you're doling it out in little particular pieces in a particular order, if we aren't able to sort of line them up in the way that they should, then our understanding and our comfort level with the story is going to be affected. And it's kind of an uncomfortable story. So I don't want the uncomfort of not having that work to add to the fact that I'm seeing these weird body horror type of things. So again, congratulations on getting somebody who is in lockstep with the two of you to give us a completely smooth ride of body horror. So going back to Sam for a second, how difficult or easy is it to draw skin that's not attached to anything? But you have people inserting hands into faces and pulling things in a real skin as taffy sort of thing. How did you figure out the balance between oh, that is just creepy enough to be okay versus, nope, that's too much.
One thing is that I've been working on that aesthetics for a while. I mean,
Okay.
yes, it came together in your skin, but I've been doing all these distorted things for a while now, and I enjoy it. And what also happens is that real skin, unfortunately, doesn't behave the way I have shown it in the film, and I'm very aware of it. So you have to kind of imagine the next best material that could substitute it. And there are silicone masks and, latex and all of that. That kind of becomes the grounding principle or the one which defines the physics of the skin so that it becomes creepy enough. And there are so many, I think one of my first influences is Brazil. And that had this face being stretched.
Oh,
And,
yeah. The Catherine
yeah.
Hellman,
Yeah. So that was one of the things. Then I have been obsessed with how in Clockwork Orange, Kubrick kind of does the,
yeah.
pulls the eye, and it's also been done in comics, if I'm not wrong. I forget the name of the character who's Professor X's sister, who kind of puts the hand and,
Cassandra Nova.
yeah. So she does that as well. What I kind of enjoy is this idea of it behaving like silicon or latex, where you put your fingers, that there is this element of stretching and it kind of takes the shape of the finger underneath. The mouth stretches in a certain way, which I really like. And you understand, okay, you have to hold a certain volume and pull. And if it starts behaving like a different material, then where will the folds come in and all of that? So that is the exciting bit for me, because it essentially makes me look at the bigger shape, then the smaller shapes, and then go into the medium shapes, and then go into the smaller shapes and add those little weird, eerie bits to it. So yeah, that's fun. But I think I've been experimenting with this for a while. Like I was drawing a certain gesture, and so the gesture was fairly simple. It was just somebody sinking his cheek into the palm of the hands. And at some point, I was just not happy with the hand being just this one elbow. So I just added two deliberate elbows to it. And it had a weird sort of shape. And then the neck got extended and it kind of sank into the hand, because when you have two elbows, the hand kind of is longer than usual. So I was doing these play things with my drawing, where you say there are restrictions, but you break a restriction and see what happens. You twist the spine beyond a certain way and you realize, oh, what if the ribcage and the pelvis are posing at 180 degrees, facing 180 degrees? And how will it twine? And what will happen to the internal organs inside? And will they pop through the skin? And you put these restrictions just to keep enjoying the act of drawing. And I think all of those practices were actually being put to test here. And I hope with this project, some publishers will find more such practices for me. Because I love doing those bits a lot.
It's something completely unrelated which struck me right now is that, there's this YouTube series by this music teaching app called Drumeo, where they get drummers and they bring them in, play a drumless track and like ask you to put their
Oh,
own
yeah. Oh, I
drums on
love
it.
that. Yeah.
And I was watching Mike Portnoy's episode where Mike Portnoy is the drummer for Dream Theater, and he's being played a Taylor Swift song. And like while he is listening to the song, he's playing a far more complicated beat than is actually in the song. And the problem is to get him to simplify.
Simplify it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, because he's like, okay, there's no key changes, there's no time changes, there's just 4/4 all the way through. What am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
Like that's what Som was just saying sounds like to me. Where like I've been drawing for the last 3-4 years, and I'm like, oh, you're like, okay, you're not satisfied with just drawing the human body. You want it to be like so complicated.
Yeah,
It's still fun to draw.
I kind of like that. Yeah. Yeah. I was after BD a lot of times, because what also happened in the first issue, there wasn't much body horror. So I had to do all of those things. Whatever I wanted to draw, I had to do it in the environments and all of that. And I couldn't distort the images. And I didn't even want to do like, say, 5-point perspectives, because the world is so sane at this point of time that there is no room for a 5-point perspective. It unnecessarily demands attention. And that is how I remember, I think it was the cafeteria scene. And I threw this idea at BD where I was like, because they are in an aspirational place, what if the camera is not looking at the faces all the time? because the 3 pages or the 4 pages are just the two of them talking to each other. And how
Mhm.
many times will you draw the damn face? I could have done it in a day, but it's not fun anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I
No,
really
it has
like,
to be complicated.
yeah, I was like, okay, can I add this aspirational quality to the camera itself, where it's distracted and it's looking at this establishment, which kind of brings out the class divide between, what these women are aspiring to be in some ways, or where they want to belong. And that is
Mhm.
how I ended up drawing those. And I had to do all of these things
Yeah.
in the first. But the third and the fourth issue, BD kind of rewarded me with what I wanted. So yeah, that worked out.
Yeah, no, and I had to explain to him, like, look, it builds over time. You can't like do
Yeah, yeah,
all of it
yeah,
in issue one.
Yeah.
yeah.
You do have 3 more issues to get through. Pace
Yeah.
yourself. I think the artist thing is called doing a George Perez, where, one person or 2 people is like, no, I want the whole team. Like, I want everybody, or there's a little
Yeah.
bit of rubble. No. There's like piles of rubble and it's a complete disaster. And, everyone's costume has all these chains and things on it. It's like everybody gets a different
Yeah.
hairstyle and all that stuff. And it's great because nobody is going to tell George what to do, and he's the master at that. But it's just like, no, this is
Yeah.
not enough for me. I need to,
Yeah, you
need to push the envelope.
Yeah, you can see Tradmore doing that like over the 3 series of Luther's Strode, satisfied with doing the school action, etc. And then you can see him sort of like, okay, no, I got to be doing more. I got to be doing more. I got to be doing more.
So I have a PDF of the first issue up, and I'm looking at that coffee shop sequence now. It is in a space, but you have very few, if any, traditional panels. The camera is moving around between your artistic choices, the coloring, but also the lettering. This really is a good example of all of those things working together to keep you in a scene without having to lock a camera and have 2 people talking. We have a close-up of Priyanka's eyes as she's taking a sip from the coffee cups. Then the larger panel below it, you're almost looking out from the kitchen, the other side of the coffee shop, behind a stack of towels, and they are barely at the bottom of this panel, coffee shop away, but between the lettering, it sort of covers it. Maybe you would remember it as being more static than it was because it was so easy for you to read. It looks easy. I'm sure it's not easy. There's no question in there.
I'm glad because that was like still the first half of the first issue, right? So actually, most of those scenes have undergone a lot more revision than most other scenes we've done. And like that was one where my script and the scene is completely different. Som would draw something, then we'd sit together and kind of discuss it, and then he would go back and redraw something. Maybe like 3 balloons are the same between the script and the final page. I mean, that was the joy of making comics. Like you just kind of react to the other person's skill and like what they enjoy doing and what they can do.
Mm-hmm. After we had finished recording, Aditya, you had mentioned that you had essentially an epiphany about yourself in relation to this story that you wanted to make sure you brought up in the follow-up. Do you remember what that was?
So I don't tend to believe that a story needs to have a self-insert character. Like you see a lot of people writing comics where like the main character or one of the characters like really the author, or like the scenarios are based on something that either happened to them or an exaggeration of what happened to them. So I don't tend to do stories like that. Like my stories are about people who are very different from me. But when we were discussing issue 2 or 3, I think, I had an epiphany of why I found Aisha and Priyanka interesting characters.
Mm-hmm.
And that was that Priyanka is essentially me at the age of 18, where I wanted to be someone who was acclaimed and well regarded, etc., etc. But I had no desire to do the work involved to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the long paths that it takes for you to go to that point. And Aisha is at the point where I was at when I started writing the story, which is somebody who, technically speaking, has achieved what they're supposed to have achieved at that point of time.
Mm-hmm.
Except you get there and you realize that doesn't afford you the kind of freedom and the kind of like utter self-control that you assume you would have when you got to that point. So you get there and you realize that, oh, I still have to do these things. I still have to be like this. And you are still dreaming of like, wouldn't it be simpler if I just stopped doing all of this and I left?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like I realized that was who Priyanka and Aisha actually represented for me. Because a lot of people ask me about like, who is Priyanka? Like, why are you interested in somebody like that?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, that's the part of me that's in there, where her character is obviously a completely different person. But
Mhm.
this idea that I haven't gotten something, but I am owed it and I should
Mm.
have it. Like that bit, I suddenly remembered while describing this home that because I think we were still designing the characters and we were trying to nail down what each of them looks like. And then
Mhm.
suddenly I was like, oh, that's who these people are to me. you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I can spoil a little, that's actually why the book ends the way it does. Because once I
Okay.
had that realization, I needed the ending to be something where both of them get what they want in some way or the other.
Mhm.
Priyanka wants to be contained by Aisha, which happens by the end, and Aisha wants to be free, and she gets that choice. She can
Yeah.
either go back to being Aisha or she can do something else.
Yeah. Just stick a pin in that. I want to mention something else first, and then we'll come back to that. Because, yeah, it's issue 4. And I don't know if it was you or somebody that you had given the script to. They were like, people are either going to love or hate issue 4. And there was something in there. There was a revelation in there. Baby Priyanka had worked with Aisha before. She had played Aisha as like a younger version, so they were in fact connected in a way that we didn't know until the end. If you come into the first issue knowing that that was part of the history versus having it at the end, it's almost the Sixth Sense Bruce Willis type of thing. Oh, spoiler, he's a ghost, right? But then they flash back to, oh, he's having dinner with his wife and the wife is ignoring him. And she was like, that totally works if you didn't know the thing. But now you know the thing and you're like, oh, okay. How do you take that and make it feel like an actual revelation as opposed to like a retcon?
First of all, that was the thing that made the book. When I hit upon that, that's when I realized what the book was going to be. I'm talking about before the first outline was written, etc., etc. As I might have mentioned in the previous interview, I came up with this idea in 2019, and I had about the first 40 pages to what is now the end of issue 2, like the sex scene between Priyanka playing Aisha and her partner.
Mhm.
Like that was what I had, and I kind of didn't know what the rest of the story was, and I left it aside till 2022, and I came back to the story realizing, hey, this is actually interesting. And at the time, that was a story about fandom. But by that point, I was like, you know what? Everything I need to say about fandom, I've said in issue 1, not the version that we have right now. Like that version had a lot more about this internet fandom that they have, like these message boards, etc., etc. Like there was a lot more detail about those things. And I was just like, okay, I don't think I have anything more to say about fandom than this is possibly a thing that's not good for the celebrity or for the fan. And that's not a question, that's an answer. So I was trying to figure out what the story would be. And I hit on this idea of performance. Like, what is Aisha doing? She's performing this character that everybody wants to think of her as. And she has done it for so long that she might or might not be connected to the person who's underneath that. And then I was like, okay, what if Priyanka is kind of doing the same thing? Like who she is right now is not essentially her authentic self, but this performance that she's put up for a long time. And then I was like, okay, what would this performance be based on? Like, why would she be obsessed with being Aisha rather than just like being close to her? And I was like, oh, what if she was Aisha? Like, what if she was this person? And then something went wrong there. And that was what led to In Your Skin. Without that moment, you don't have the book the way it exists right now. And then it was a matter of like outline over outline and trying to figure out where that goes. Because it doesn't go in issue 1. Like that's not something that I think works. And in the first 2 outlines, it came in issue 3 or at the end of issue 2, I think. It's also like we kept shifting from like 5 issues to 4 issues to 5 issues. We went back and forth, and before we landed on that. And it was a whole structure thing. It was all about where this goes changes the structure of the thing. Because then the audience knows different things at different points. I think I had written an entire script, but the first draft of the whole thing was written before Som started drawing issue 1. And that one ended up with an entire flashback at the beginning of issue 4, where you are told all of this. It's revealed to you in issue 3, and you're told all of this, like what happened. And Eric was like, this is spoiling things. I don't think we need to know this.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, what do you think we need to know? And then I really started thinking, well, like, why is this important? What does this do? How can we build to this? And then I realized that, oh, this is how it needs to go. And what then needs to happen is that the entire story needs to be structured in a way that when you get there, it actually
Mhm.
makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Right.
Which is sort of, again, I generally tend not to do this, but I'm going to talk about like the writing aspect of it. The coffee shop conversation works in one way when you don't know this piece of information,
Mhm.
and then works in a whole different way when you know this piece of information.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
none of what is there goes away. Everything about their present relationship is still there. But you suddenly have one layer that suddenly makes sense about the things that are being talked about in that conversation, makes sense in a different way when
Mhm.
you get there. And my hope is that that's true for almost every scene. But
Mhm.
that's particularly true for that one scene where the writing is dancing around that topic.
Mhm.
But you don't know that it's dancing around that topic.
No, that's the best kind. The choice of how to give that information in issue 4. It's essentially 3 or 4 lines, right? Priyanka says, I worked with her before. And then Ayesha says, baby Priya, I remember you. Always wondered what happened to you. So it gives us enough to understand what happened, but you don't say how old Priyanka was when she starred in these 4 films as young Ayesha. You're giving us information, but you're also giving us something to think about, because if she is, baby Priya is super younger, then she doesn't have enough time to form a real connection to wanting to be Ayesha in a certain way. Whereas if she's closer to adolescence, then, that changes things. So like if she's younger, then her mother becomes much more of a stage mother. So then you have a line in there that Priyanka is saying, I could have been a star if mom wanted. And then it's like, okay, is she trying to get back on the track that she felt like she was going before her mother decided not to, or did other things? So that works in a much better way than just having a opening scene of flashback to a thing. These aren't even little snippets. You're not breaking from the visual scene. A word balloon here, a word balloon here, and a word balloon here that lets the reader have this other bomb go off. And visually, it's juxtaposed with the zoom in on this mask that is creepy as
Yeah.
fuck.
That is also.
Yeah, well, congratulations of this thing giving it. That is bizarre.
But I will actually go so far as to say, though, you actually do see baby Priya in the book. She's actually in 2 places before the revelation.
Okay.
And I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay.
I wrote this book like it was going to be the last book I did. This was the book that if you tell me that I get to do only one book and then I have to stop, this would be the book that I wanted to do. And then I wanted to make a book that people can keep coming back to, that people would get more out of every time they read it. And that's not just on the plot level, but also on the thematic level. But that part is something that you can't necessarily control. But at least on the plot level, or like precisely what happened here, is something that once you read the whole thing, you come back to that and it becomes more clear. And that's the kind of stories I like. But it's also like one of those things where, like, if you have this on your bookshelf, every time you pick this up, I want you to get at least a couple of new things. That was sort of the intention of doing it that intensely.
The pacing of this is so, you get to be a little more frenetic and a little more fragmented. And then the last half of issue 4 echoes the beginning of the first issue, where we have a dance between these 2 characters in a completely different way, in a different environment. Can you talk about what it was like reading the script for that last half of issue 4 and being like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? What immediately sort of came to mind with it?
So I did have some difficulties because the last 4-5 pages were a little intense. And even though I kind of knew how the story is supposed to end on an emotional note, I wasn't really aware of the exact visuals with which it would end. So when I read through it, I think I reached out to BD a couple of times to understand what he wanted. And then he explained it to me. Here is something that BD knew by the second or the third issue, that I hate reusing a panel. Like I'll draw something and I'll add my nuances. And there are times, unless the story really demands me, and there is this one moment that the story comes back to every time it touches upon. I think it's on the second page where the two women are holding their hands and dancing. And there is an echo of that moment throughout the issue at different stages. And that was quite poetic for me. So that's possibly the only point where I have taken that drawing, reduced the opacity of it, and I've still drawn on top of it to get the to get a different drawing. I didn't use the drawing, but yeah. But the rest of the bit, BD had to explain things to me a little bit because I didn't grasp. See, the other thing is that writing and visually imagining something are two different elements altogether. So when you read somebody else's writing, as a visual artist, you're also going to places that maybe he didn't want you to go to. So for that, you have to constantly keep in, understand with him as to, there was this element of a cyclone sort of a thing, which I hadn't imagined it as a cyclone. Because cyclone is still a certain kind of order, right? Like if you write the mathematical equation for a cyclone, you can still write that sort of an order. And I never visualized that sort of an order for the end. I was always being a little more chaotic. And that is when I think BD explained the whole intention of it. The whole exploding and the screens. Initially, I didn't get the idea of the screens. But after the second read, I think I began to have an idea of, oh, this is what he's going for. Oh, that makes sense. But I was also not sure if the audience, having gone through all of these, and the screens talk about moments which you haven't really seen anywhere else. So they're not echoing. They are echoing different moments from the woman's life, which the audience hasn't been privy to. And I wasn't sure as to how the audience would take it,
The way that you staged it, they can be seen, but they're not made the focal points. And they're also coming after that spread of where we are getting periods from both of their lives. It gives us enough visual information to let us know, yes, this is not stuff that you've seen before, because these are people that have had entire lives up to this point, and nobody has seen these beats or whatever, but we are seeing them break themselves apart and come back together. And part of it is musculature, part of it is bone, part of this, but part of it is the screens of their lives and all that stuff. Or at least that's my take on it.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, because what BD said was on a similar note as well. And that is when I said, that works for me as well. And there were other elements which are completely BD. Had this idea of, for some panels, he wanted a certain superimposition on the character's body parts, which geometrically fits in, but it echoes a different panel from a different part, that sort of a thing. So he wanted to play that visual, and that was completely BD. Like, I don't think I had done it that way, but then he insisted, and that is
I
how
think we went
it
back
fell
and
in
forth.
place.
Like the way you had done it was that you had actually tried to avoid covering up their bodies with it. And I was like, no. What we need to do is we cover up the body and we kind of run a tangent through it, so that you're essentially like connecting this image with the central image of the spread. Which is again, like, there's something happening in that spread that I don't know if people will pick up on, but that's sort of optional for me. Like, I don't mind if people don't necessarily pick up on that. So again, I'm not going to say
right.
And maybe I can try. No, I don't want to spoil it for you.
No. I think it's in the script, so you know what it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe not, but my interpretation is that it's something of her and the other, and that sort of a thing is also there.
I could say it out loud. It's essentially like those panels have the lives they might have lived if things
they might have lived. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was saying, that there is an element of Priyanka in Ayesha as well, even in her bare self, where she has not really taken.
I think people keep telling me like Ayesha doesn't deserve that, etc., and I'm like, well, you really don't know what she has done in her past. Like, she's not necessarily a pure innocent person. Like, she's kind of gone through her own shit. Like, I hope the story makes it clear, like, you have to have gone through some shit to get to where she is. And,
nobody gets through this unscathed. Especially not, oh God, I'm forgetting on his name.
Rian.
Nachikete. Yeah. The stinger at the end of 3, where she calls him a pathetic little man. I'm like, no, man, he didn't deserve any of that. Sorry, that was a little editorial. Or
No, but I'm very, very
stray comment.
fascinated by.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, I'm really fascinated by how you feel about the character. So in some ways, it's actually good. Yeah. No, fascinated in the sense that like when we started, we really did not have such innocent sort of views about Nachiket, and we wanted him to be the butt of all jokes. Which in some ways, Rian also ended up becoming the butt of all jokes in a different way. But we wanted both these characters to face the brunt of these two other feminine energies that are there. They have been exploiting as well in their own sweet way. So yeah.
Enough people told me that, I like Nachiket deserved what he got, that I'm very interested to hear what you just said.
No, I don't.
I mean, if you read issue 1 again, he's not such a nice guy.
No, that's true. And maybe if I sit down and read all of them back to back, that'll play a little better. But
but I mean, again, that ambivalence is on purpose. Like I don't think, like, in my point of view, none of them are like good
strictly
or
black
bad
or white.
because,
Yeah. Everybody is a shade of gray, and you leave it to the audience as to where their empathy lies, which shade of gray does their empathy lies to, and that is kind of fascinating for me,
Yeah, I guess maybe because it feels like he's coming from a purer place. He's in love with Priyanka. He does all of this to get her to see him. And he goes along with so many things to get her to notice him. And she does, but then she uses him. And then I certainly have more empathy for him than all of the Bollywood people.
Fair enough.
What I also love about Nachiket is that when somebody is the most vulnerable, it is the easiest to be kind and take advantage of it. On the level of mankind or the morality of humans, where do you rank this guy who takes advantage of a person when he or she is the most vulnerable? And what he gets away with is just being a little kind and then get what he wants back. So for me, that kind of character is pretty questionable. Obviously, if somebody is hurt and I help them and then I take advantage of the fact that later they want this, I'll get them this, but I'll get something back from them as well. No,
he's a very specific kind of Indian guy, I think. Where I have seen enough men like that where, I mean, it's partly the nice guy syndrome, but these are men who will not even be too obvious about that. Like they will just, they are kind in strategic ways. They're kind in selfish ways. I just thought it was interesting. I don't even think of any of these 4 people as good or bad. Like that's just not an interesting axis for me. For me, the interesting axis is what you're looking for, how you treat the person in front of you, and what you get out of it. Each of them gets a different thing out of it. And well, whether it's appropriate to them or not, I think it can be left to the reader. Rian, he's a bit of an asshole, but he doesn't do anything bad through the story.
That's true. Yeah.
But I still have readers who are like, he's such a douchebag. Like, I hate him.
Yeah.
Why is she married to him? And I'm like, that's what I want you to ask throughout the whole story. Like, why is she about to marry him?
As I'm looking at that page with the baby Priya, and so we see Priyanka and Aisha are there, but they're actually not the people that we see sort of on the screen. And then, of course, I thought back to Tropic Thunder, Robert Downey Jr., I'm the dude playing the other dude. So I guess this is the question for Sam. Was it different drawing Priyanka as Ayesha or drawing Ayesha as Priyanka?
Yeah, it was. Initially, we had the transition between Ayesha in Priyanka and Priyanka in Ayesha's skin was something that we had already planned. And if you notice, there are strategic changes that happen, like Priyanka, before let's call it the incident. Before the incident, she has this habit of tying her hair as a bun, and it's all slightly messier. There are just little strands, stray strands. And post the incident, she always keeps her hair, what Ayesha used to keep as an actress. And if you notice, post the incident, Ayesha, as in Priyanka and Ayesha's skin, sometimes she ties her hair as a bun. So it's that natural instinct of somebody to pull their, and it was derived from so these are a little bit of moments that we were thinking, as to when we were doing the character traits. that Priyanka is somebody who looks up to Aisha, that she copies her in some ways. So the whole idea of like, I started with Aisha having bangs in front of her forehead, and then it just became that even Priyanka needs to have bangs. Or I don't know if it was the other way around in design, but at least it was the same way in my head. And then finding nuances to make sure that I don't know if readers will notice. And comics is such a difficult medium that as you go, there are a little bit of inconsistencies that can creep in. But one of the things that I tried was, if you see Aisha before the incident, she's quite fit, like her deltoids and the little, you don't really get the triceps, but you get a very fit sort of an arm. And then later you see a little bit of fat as well. And in one of those issues where she had a scene with Arman, there's this whole space where all the
armory
guns,
scene, I guess.
yeah, the armory scene. So I had made a little bit of a flabby sort of an arm and a little slight bit of tummy fat in her to kind of make sure that this is Priyanka and Aisha's skin.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of so we didn't really get at least I didn't get the yay to practice. But by the end of it, it was more of that, Nachiket, when he appears, he should look like Nachiket. Even if was it Aisha? Yeah, it was Aisha in Nachiket's skin. So even then, he essentially looks like Nachiket. And Aisha anyway is supposed to be very skinny. So I was trying to implement that in my drawing in terms of the physics as well. So when she peels her skin, you will notice that elements of fat are stuck onto the skin rather than the muscles. And there are strategic fats that, especially the mammaries, which carry only the fats. Maybe a little bit on the cheek. Otherwise, the larger fat, which defines the shape of a human body, which could change the volume of the human body, I got it pulled with the skin itself. So if not to justify, at least give the inkling that an Aisha in a Priyanka's skin can still look bulkier, but like there is a distinct personality of Aisha there. So those were the kind of things that we were. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think this thing that he just said really sells the change to a degree that I don't know if another artist might have done it the same way, and it might have felt a little disconnected from reality. But because Som was so interested in grounding, okay, there is this fantastical thing happening, but I'm going to try and make sure that it's sold on a physical level. And the way he talks about the human body, that's sort of like not necessarily clinical, but almost in an anatomical way, rather than like describing it in a sensual way, was a huge part of why the art works again. Because there are several artists I might imagine who would do those same scenes in a much more titillating way. And the fact that they are not titillating, the fact they are grounded in the body, allows then the horror to emerge fully. This level of thought was essential, I feel, to the art.
It's on a subconscious level, but there's enough there so that the questions that I was talking about asking earlier in the interview of like, okay, how does somebody putting on somebody else's skin not look like that person wearing somebody else's skin, like Leatherface or whatever? Because there are enough subtle things in what you show and how you show it, and the decisions that you make give us enough confidence in what we're seeing to be like, okay, this makes some kind of sense. It doesn't take us out of the drama in order to prove a plot point that hopefully nobody should be having because they should be in the drama anyway. And that is really difficult to do with something that we all know. Like, we all know bodies, and we know when it's wrong. We know when something doesn't look right, especially in comics, where you have a visual, but it's not like a movie or whatever. You can have an artist like Bill Sienkiewicz, where he can draw something that is not in any way anatomically correct, but we know we're like, that is correct. Whereas somebody else can draw something with a Terry Austin level of precision and detail, and you're like, yeah, the eyes are a little off. It's this weird double standard that artists have to deal with. But I had sort of a Venn diagram of the art in terms of who I thought were speaking to me as I was looking into this. And I thought Tex Avery, for like the elasticity and all these things, Junji Ito with like the body horror, and like Frank Cho. And ironically enough, Frank started off as studying to be a nurse, so medical illustration and stuff. Like, he knew that before he had to for comics. But that level of malleability, being able to have things not just big and balloony, but to be able to have a center and then stretch it, but not stretch it in a way that breaks a suspension of disbelief. Do you feel there are any other influences in that type of way that may not be obvious? And not even saying that those were, your influences.
Yeah,
That's just sort of how I
yeah,
defined it in my head.
I understand. It's difficult for me to kind of say if there was a specific artistic influence for this particular comic book, because I remember when BD pitched the idea to me, he had seen some of my other work as well. So BD knows my entire gamut of work. So he knows that I can draw a little cartoony as well. And when I explored the first character design, he subtly questioned me as to, are you sure that this is the kind of direction that you would want to take? Because I was really trying to ground it into reality. I wanted it to be a very believable, like Bombay needs to look like Bombay and no other city. A house in Bombay needs to look like that particular house in Bombay and no other house. Very contextually hyper-localized, that sort of a thing. And obviously, when you take those sort of liberties with form, say, if you go slightly in the Bruce Timm or say a Sean Galloway or those kind of styles, when you have those, obviously stretching and pulling, all of those becomes a lot easier. And because I had a very deliberate take on, I wanted to ground it in reality, BD had some obvious concerns whether, we'll be able to pull this into, when the horror bit appears. And I think I have had some general influences in terms of drawing in my life, which includes Otomo and in a lot of ways. But specifically for this, so there was Terada Katsuya and Otomo as grounding influences for how I would want to play with form.
Let me pull it back a little bit. I feel like the last in-story page, the character that we see has a choice of which skin they want to put on. Ayesha's skin and Nachiket's skin. Can the reader read anything into the fact that there are two different genders there? Or is it just more of the plot dictates that, these are the two options that this person would have to choose how they re-enter the world?
It's definitely on purpose. I think the question you hit upon is the correct one. I obviously don't want to give an answer for that. It's like the Inception, like people keep talking about whether the top actually topples or not. I'm like, if you wanted to give you the answer, you would have put it in the movie. But there were pages that are not in the book anymore that were cut for space, and because we felt that they were maybe less specifically relevant to the story we were telling, and we did have some limits on real estate, which had there's a reason. Yes, there is a gender component here that runs through the whole story. I have never thought of the story as being a story about either women in general, men in general, etc., etc. The story is about these specific characters, but both of these characters are ambivalent about A, their sexuality, and B, the bodies that they've been put in. And when we think about the idea of I don't want to use a specific word, but when we think about the idea of not fitting in the body that you have or wanting to move from that to something else, gender is a big way that is expressed in our society. There are different kinds of not fitting in your own body. It's not only about gender, it's about several different things. I also hope that it's clear enough through the story that both of these women are ambivalent about the idea of being women. Again, I'm not saying that they have specific identity issues to do with that. It's just that the space they exist in and what power looks like in those scenarios plays a part in their story. To the extent that you broach the idea, one kind of comes up on the idea of, hey, you can take on somebody else's skin. Then I feel like the first thing that becomes almost irrelevant is which gender the other person's skin is. Because if the idea is to flow in terms of your identity. See, the idea is to make your identity something that is flexible and malleable and can be changed. Then, like, as much as being a celebrity or not, it's being a woman or not, it's being a man or not. I don't tend to talk about this very loudly, but I'm non-binary, and gender is something that has been on top of my mind for like the last 20 years. Like since I went through puberty, like it's been something that I think about in some way or the other. It's not necessarily something that's very important to me all the time, but it's something that interests me. And it's part of why I find a lot of stories limit themselves into being heterosexual, male-oriented, cisgender kind of thing. Like, where isn't a story the space where you get to explore most of that? Like, isn't a story the space where you get to play with those ideas? So, of course, when I had the opportunity, I wanted to play with the idea.
Yeah. As you were saying that, again, a couple of things came to mind. First, it is a read, but it's not the only read of looking at that panel and seeing the two skins there and having it, okay, picking one or the other. Maybe just having the two skins there means, oh, there is a choice, like the suit that you wear. You wear the good suit on Sunday and you wear the regular clothes on the thing. And there are options.
There's no reason that person might not take both of them.
Right. Looking at it not as a one or the other, but like, this is my closet now. I have multiple options. And thinking of the last half of that issue and the coming to this emotional epiphany and then the dance that the two characters become one, the very last image, it informs the page before it. And my read on it is that it is drawn very literally, but it is not a story beat. It is the two of them in a dance, but in a way that doesn't have the overtones of their first dance that we see at the beginning of issue 1 that is very beautiful, but it has a tension to it. This is them coming to peace with each other. To me, it says whatever choice is made on the page before, and there doesn't even necessarily have to be a choice, but I think because we think it's so much of plot stuff, it's like, oh, there's a decision. Your brain is like, well, what's the decision? But it doesn't matter because as a reader, I am seeing that last page and being like, whatever the tension of this particular story, it has resolved in a way that is good. Again, not a question. Yeah, talk about that last page, the decision to have that as the last beat. Was it always there? Was there always that grace note at the end?
It was there by the final outline, I think.
Okay.
Like, I think we did 5 outlines total for the book. And of course, the book changed a lot since that final outline as well. But that piece was there, and that piece literally was my treat to myself. To a point, it was not relevant if that page needs to be there, etc., etc. Like, the moment I hit on that idea that that's going to be the last page, that was it for me. Like, I knew that that would be the last page. I put in that piece for myself, and then obviously Som executed beautifully, Francisco executed beautifully. But even Eric, I don't think ever questioned like, hey, do we need that page? It was just like, I think you can tell that that page sort of needs to be. Like, by the 4th issue, I am definitely moved on beyond the idea of what the plot is doing. Hopefully by issue 3, I see, but by issue 4, it's clear that the plot is not what the thing is about. And therefore, then having that one page, which is essentially a little treat.
Yeah. Again, the confidence of just having the last half of that issue just being the expression of this epiphany and a healing in a book that's been so dark. Som, did you see that coming? Did you expect it to have that type of catharsis at the end?
Not really. In fact, the story stayed the same in essence throughout, but the outline that I had read, I think partly it is me to blame. I think the way I was drawing, I think BD was also trying to figure out ways to incorporate that into the story beats. So the story kind of went into, like, I knew that there are certain characters who are going to get a very bad end, but how and the specifics of which I was not completely sure. And the ending, as I honestly didn't see it coming that way. But the last page really, it made itself justified in a certain way. Like, again, I did that stupid thing of not drawing the pose the way BD had. And I did a completely different pose, and I tried to do a few different things. And BD made me go back to it. And I'm glad that he did, because when you read the entire comic book, it makes sense that it has to be this certain pose. It's nothing to do with ego. It has nothing to do with arrogance. It's just this little child in me who kind of wants to sit to solve a puzzle. And at the first go itself, you solve the puzzle. And then you're like, okay, can I do something different? And then there is no other way, You hate to be in that bed. And I think the pose that I had done was that never received any kind of revision. It was that pose. It was always that pose. And I kept drawing that pose overall. So I just wanted to change it a little bit, spice it a little bit, see if I could tone down the ethereal quality to it. And it never quite worked out till PD said that I think we should go for it. And I'm glad that he did, because then I went for it. And even when I was drawing it, I could sense that, yeah, it's going to bring the whole story together. The story is incredibly brutal to its audience, because any character that you remotely relate with goes through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
And even the fringe characters go through a lot of shit, There is this guy who's just a guy who, in a chai tapri, he's just having tea and he spots a celebrity and he just wants something for his social media profile. That innocent guy also kind of goes through shit. We are those guys, In fact, that is that one guy that I relate to the most in the most human way, because celebrity, if you boil down all the freaking celebrities in the world, they don't constitute 1% of the entire universe. The remaining constitute almost 80 to 90% of the universe. So not the universe, the whatever, Earth, whatever it is. That particular bit was where BD was being kind to the audience, and I could sense that. And now that he has told me, I wasn't really aware of the fact that it spurred from the realization that he had. It kind of makes sense to me as to how he came to that as well, because it's essentially being kind to oneself as well, because he has been brutally brutal to his self in some ways when he was narrating the story. Like those two aspects that he realized are in some ways, they are not him, but that's some parts of him that he has been trying to identify. And all of that does make sense to me. So it resonated a lot with me that way.
Yeah, and I think that's just something.
I'm so glad, because I thought he was not happy drawing that last page. I'm glad he's come around to it.
It's great. It's that catharsis moment that you don't think you're going to get in a book. Beginning of the fourth issue, you're like, man, shit is going to go down on this, and then it does, but also not.
Yeah. Imagine going through 115 pages of blood, shit, and gore, and sex, and all of that. And what can the last 116th page do to you possibly? You've left all your hopes till then, and then it gives you that little comfort that,
I was actually having a conversation with a friend about he wants to read more hopeful stories, etc., etc. And she asked me for recommendations. And I was like, look, I'm the wrong person to recommend for that. Because I think hopeful stories that are, like, generally speaking hopeful are for kids. Like, they're not for adults. Like, they're good for a pulp read or something like that. But that's not necessarily things that I find interesting. And she was like, wait, why? Like, are you that cynical? And I was like, no. The thing is, if you narrated to me a real life story of somebody like saving a dog from a river, I'd be very happy about that. But if you put it in a story, that's not difficult to do. Yeah, you just have a dog fall in the river and the guy saves it. So when it comes to stories, I find it far more interesting when a story is showing you all the contrast that goes into creating the idea of hope. A brutal story with hope at the end is far more meaningful to me that way than a story that is just like, if I know halfway through that these people are going to come out alive, things are going to be well, etc., etc., it's fine. Exactly. There's nothing wrong with those stories. It's just I don't find those stories that interesting. But something like Between Two Fires, like Christopher Buehlman, it's a brutal story. But then, like, you come out of it still feeling hope for humankind. And that's the magical part.
If I may add, I mean, one of the things that I have difficulties with when a story is hopeful. See, I'm not against that idea of storytelling at all. It's just that if somebody has to mimic the idea of real life, if you are in the middle of shit, you actually don't know if it is going to fall in place or not. That
Mhm.
horror is far more brutal than this ideology of horror, that somebody went through something and things are okay at the end, or even if they reach a certain kind of closure, that includes death as a closure as well. I feel this idea of being in a space where you don't know what is going to happen and you're in the middle of shit, far more harrowing. The lack of clarity in that moment to be far more harrowing than any bit of clarity which is comforting in any way. And that is what this story does to me as well, because it really doesn't promise me any kind of closure. And that little bit that happens is right at the last page at the end, when I'm
Mhm.
least expecting it, when I've like given up all hope. And
Uh-huh.
that is why it becomes a lot more rewarding, you know?
Mhm.
That makes me sound like a very brutal writer, though.
I mean, all writers are brutal.
No, no, I might
Yeah,
be. I
yeah.
I
mean, that
think
would be fun.
Stephen King or
Yeah.
somebody had said that you have to punish your characters or something of that
Oh,
sort,
yeah.
no? That to
Yeah,
that
Yeah.
order. Yeah.
I do think,
yeah.
getting back to something we talked about earlier, the serialization of it. The series will always exist as 4 issues, but more importantly, it'll be collected. So people will sit down and read it back to front. And so they will not have an opportunity to stop a story earlier and not have this resolution at the end. Whereas, like, if you read issue 1, it was like, oh, this is going to be a roller coaster. Issue 2 and issue 3, you're like, man, do I want to keep going with this? It's going to be rough, but I'm 75% in. I'm going to go with it. And then you read that last issue and you're like, it's in the thing. Oh, that's a different experience. And it's interesting here and thinking about it in a larger thing where, all storytellers work with those type of confines of, my story is going to be partially experienced without getting to the end of it. How do you build a story that can satisfy both if they have these two different avenues of the way it can be experienced?
Like, this book wasn't particularly written with commercial considerations in mind. It was the book that I wanted to see out in the world. And my bet was that if I like this kind of stuff, other people might. And that's been the case with horror movies and with books as well, where, like, Julia Ducournau's Titan, for example. It was a movie that I watched fairly early and I was incredibly thrilled by it, but I didn't know whether other people would like it. And then I found out that, yes, like, there are enough other people who like that kind of stuff. And that was kind of my bet with this book as well, where sort of the brutality of the horror, the messiness of the characters, etc. We used to have a bunch of that in the Vertigo era and post-Vertigo era, but after that we have, I would almost say, like, lost faith in readers to a degree, where we want to make sure that the readers don't misunderstand what we're doing, because we feel like that might lead to a certain kind of tension. But I don't think tension is a bad thing between a creator and their audience. The job of a creator is not to give the audience what they want, but what the author thinks is good for the audience. So for me, then the guide was my own reading tastes, where I prefer stories with gaps in them. I prefer stories which don't give themselves out completely in one read. And I prefer stories that give you character notes that are genuinely messy and need to be thought about by the audience, rather than telling you, hey, this person is a good person because they did this person is a bad person because they did this, or they're great because they did good and bad things. I'm not telling you what I think of the things that Nachiket and Priyanka are doing, like whether I think they're good things or bad things. I think you can make your mind up about that. And I think, honestly, I don't think I'm that unclear about those, but if there is certain ambiguity about what I think about those characters, I feel like that ambiguity is fine to have. And my feeling is that there are enough people in the audience who like that people who are willing to take a risk about, like, hey, I won't necessarily get everything I want from this book, but once I finish the book, I might be a different person. Like, I might change a little. It might give me a kind of storytelling I haven't experienced or thought about or experienced enough, maybe. And because I thought about this as possibly my only book, like, I mean, I was always going to do more, but like, it was like, okay, live every day like it's your last. It's kind of like write every book like it's your last. And I then wanted to kind of stay true to what I grew up reading. I think my first comic was the one from the Marv Wolfman Gene Colan run where the two kids are imagining Superman into being, which is like a
Oh, yeah,
very
yeah.
kind of a world without
Yeah.
Superman or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Where like the first story you read about Superman is the one which doesn't technically have Superman in it. And the
Yeah, yeah.
second Superman comic I read was during the death of Superman, which had a cyborg Superman in it. And again, like I was thrilled by them. Like I had no idea what was going on with the rest of the story. Like I
Mhm.
had no idea. Like I was like, wait, Superman's died? Like the first two comics I read about Superman are like one without Superman and the one where Superman's died. I
Yeah.
knew who Superman was because of the Fleischer brother cartoons. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that feeling that I don't know what's going on, that there's a bigger world out here that I don't entirely understand. Have you read Alan Moore's Miracle Man?
Yes.
So way more than a bunch of the other books that Alan Moore does, Miracle Man captures what it felt like when you were a kid reading a superhero comic, because it gives you that sense of wonder. As an adult, that works partly because of the grounding. Works because when he's talking about how powerful somebody is, he's kind of praising it in terms that work in the real world, right? And
Mhm.
therefore, then the sense of wonder is heightened. I want to give that feeling. Like that's the stories I grew up reading, where I didn't understand everything that was going on, but I felt a certain sense of mystique and awe from, and that's what I hope people come out of this with. If they don't, I mean, like it's okay. Like it's better to try hard at something and fail than not to try hard at all.
So, there you have it, folks. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you are given the opportunity to do so, because it really does help us out, and we would super appreciate it. So, until we meet again, hopefully soon, my name is Greg. Stay safe, keep enjoying those funny books, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening. Systems disengaged.